everybody, Ian here, and I'm joined today by Robert Griffin of Scat Records. Robert, thanks so much for joining me and doing this. All right, so I've been going over in my head kind of where to start with this, and I'm still not really sure, honestly, but I guess maybe what makes most sense is just talk about why did I originally contact you to talk to you at all, and it's about your Guided by Voices reissue campaign, and specifically The Devil Between My Toes is scheduled to come out in a few weeks here. So maybe the first question is that still on schedule?
Yes, it is. Actually,
Good,
all the pre-orders are packed up. We're gonna start shipping them next week.
Oh wow, that's awesome. So you're even kind of ahead of schedule in a way. Or is it getting to be that late? What day is it? Yeah. Anyway,
April is the official street date.
So, right.
Yeah, we're a bit ahead.
Yeah, and so you've been re-releasing all of the Guided by Voices stuff that Scat Records has traditionally dealt with. So, you know, starting with Guided by B1000 in 2015 and also King Shit in 2015. And then Vampire and Titus, was this 2020, I'm thinking?
Correct.
Yeah, and then as of right now, the most recent then is Propeller. This came out a little over a year ago. And I'm thinking this one maybe got delayed a little bit. Is that
it did.
Right? Maybe by a month or something.
COVID outbreak at
RTI. Right. And so, you know, Devil Between My Toes coming out now, that's something like 8 months behind when you had originally wanted to put it out.
Yeah.
Right. So I don't know if I want to start off the whole conversation talking about a bummer like that, but I guess that's sort of where we got led. I don't know. So that seems to be an industry-wide thing, is my understanding, is these huge delays.
For sure.
But I also get the impression that maybe RTI especially is maybe more behind than most, or do you have an impression of that?
You know, that's hard to say. There are so many plants, and it seems like other than a few outliers, it's pretty much a 1-year turn time at this point.
Right.
But I think that part of what goes on with RTI is they deal with so many specifically audiophile labels.
Right.
You know, they're doing all the audio fidelity stuff, lots of high-end jazz reissues.
Yep.
And I imagine some of the proprietary processing that especially Mobile Fidelity's using, that's probably really time intensive.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, supply chain issues, unprecedented demand, probably not as much an issue at RTI as some other plants, but certainly major labels not having their own infrastructure anymore is
totally
the biggest gum up.
Totally. I mean, like, you know, records are being pressed at a rate that they haven't been pressed in something like 30 years. Is, you know, I remember seeing some article recently that talked about that. But, you know, the record pressing capacity is built for, you know, 2010 levels of record production. So like it just can't handle it. So like even before supply shocks, this, you know, it was kind of a problem waiting to happen, even if there weren't these big delays before the pandemic.
Absolutely. It was already taking much longer, but
Mm-hmm.
the pandemic exacerbated that.
Exacerbated
from
it, yeah.
being 6 months to 10 months to 12 months to 14.
And then do you have any sense of moving forward what this is going to be like? So because your original plan was to release the early Guided by Voices stuff over the course of about 2 years. So because of this delay, you know, 8
Clearly
months.
Going to take a bit longer.
Yeah. And so you're basically kind of at their mercy at this point. Is that kind of how you have to approach it?
Yes, but it is possible for me to, now that I know, like at the time that I put Devil into production, I was still thinking like, yeah, 6 to 8 months. You know, that's about what it had been taking. So I was sort of blindsided by like no news from the pressing plant, no news. And then it became clear, like, okay, we're looking at 1-year turns now. So what I've done is I'm just, as far as the Guided by Voices stuff goes, I'm putting another project in the pipeline every 6 months, figuring that unless the delays become even more extreme, that I will reach that, getting one out every 6 to 8 months goal.
Hmm.
And I'm just doing that in general with releases. Just things are sitting in production much longer than before, but I'm dealing by putting something new in the pipeline every few months.
Gotcha. Well, I mean, that's good to hear from my point of view, just because it hasn't sort of totally discouraged you from even doing this at all. I mean,
Oh no.
there's the I reread the interview you did about a year ago in Please Kill Me with Eric Davidson. Um,
Right.
and at the time, you were sounding like super optimistic about everything. That's when you talked about the 2 year sort of time frame, and you just seemed excited about what's coming. And then these huge delays start happening. So it must be frustrating on some level, but at the same time, it's not. It doesn't prohibit you from functioning at the same time. You're able to you know you're taking the attitude of you're just going to press forward with this regardless.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Great. So with Guided by Voices, so that's how I came to know Scat Records, um,
Sure.
and first got into them in the mid '90s, and I and maybe I'll just mention real quick too. This is record collection 2.0 behind me. I started collecting records in the mid '90s and quickly got into Guided by Voices. Sold my record collection stupidly in 2005, and I had all that scat stuff. I had the box. I had uh, I had the B1000 on white, which I so miss. For me, that white vinyl was just such a part of that record for me. Anyway, and I had Vampire on the marbled gray or no marbled brown,
Nice.
and I had the I'm a Scientist EP. So I had all this stuff, and so I'm so thankful that you're doing this reissue series. And what's great too is that you're doing the tip-on
Oops.
jackets. Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Your image froze, but I can hear you.
Okay, yep. I just got a message saying your internet connection is unstable. I hope this all works out. I live in the country. That's my router there. I got satellite internet. I hope that doesn't screw the whole thing up. I guess we'll just keep going and hopefully it works. Anyway, so when you did the box originally, well, maybe I should just say,
Right.
so when you first started working with Guided by Voices in about 1993, and you did 2 EPs and 2 LPs. You did the Grand Hour EP. You did Vampire and Titus. You did the I Am a Scientist EP, and then you did B1000. And then you re-released all of their pre-scat catalog in a box set. I think it was just called Box, and that was everything from Devil Between My Toes up to Propeller, and then also
Yes.
the King Shit compilation. Um, so I'm curious about how did that come about? How did it come to be that you originally reissued the early Guided by Voices catalog?
Well, you know, I honestly don't recall what prompted it. If it was the band expressing interest in having that happen, or if that was sort of a consolation prize once they signed to Matador. Like, okay, you're not the last album we promised you, but maybe we can work something out here. I It was so long ago. I don't remember the germ of the idea. It could just as well have been demand from fans because so many people were getting into the band then, and you couldn't
Mhm.
get those records, especially like Devil Between My Toes with only 300 pressed.
Wow,
So that it just seemed like that stuff should be in print.
totally. And do you remember the process of getting the material to cut lacquers from, and do you remember what was used to cut from
Sure, for Box
for Box for all those albums in
specifically,
Box? Yeah.
those Bob still had all the original edited master reels, so those were all cut straight up analog to copper in the DMM process.
including
And we
Propeller.
went with that. Pardon?
Including Propeller.
Yes.
No kidding. Wow.
But in Propeller, case, the master was a cassette,
Sure. And you can
not
kind
a,
of
you know,
hear
quarter
it.
inch. Yeah.
There's some speed inconsistencies and, you know, some wow and flutter going on there, but it's you know, it's guided by voices. And so, all right, so, you know, I alluded to this earlier, or I guess when we had an email exchange earlier, but you know, the fidelity of their earlier albums kind of set the stage for what they were to do with you. But like, you know, it seems to me at least that it was fairly unprecedented to release such kind of what turned out to be at least major records like Vampire and B1000 in such low fidelity. And I'm curious, um, what's you know, what was your sort of reaction? So like, I'm very grateful that you allowed them to release it in the form they wanted to release it in. Did you as a record label guy say like, wait a minute, can you know, like, did that give you pause at all, or were you just like, okay, that's it, let's do it?
A little bit of both. Certainly not unprecedented, and that like I didn't immediately think of it as, oh my God, this is so lo-fi. I don't know if this can even be cut, because you know there were bands like Pussy Galore, and you know compared to early Pussy Galore releases, the lowest fi GBV sounds like it was recorded in a tricked out 24 track studio, you know.
Really, I haven't heard that stuff.
So
Okay.
that wasn't an issue. Um, when Bob sent the Grand Hour, I immediately loved that. There was no question. Vampire and Titus was such a departure in terms of composition and songwriting, and it wasn't just the sound of it. It was like, okay, this is a guided by voices I don't really know yet. And the first listen sort of threw me off.
Yeah, and Bob played drums.
And
Like, it was Bob played pretty much all the instruments,
right.
right?
So my first listen, I was a little taken aback. And I'm sure I've said this elsewhere. On the next listen, I was kind of staying at my girlfriend's house for a couple months. And I was taking a bath, and I got the boombox out and stuck it on the sink while I was in the tub and put Vampire on. And somehow the reverb that bathrooms just have, I mean, any home studio, chances are they're recording some vocals in the bathroom because of all the reflections and everything. And somehow it just totally made sense. And some of the songs started to click for me. And another listen later, and it's like, okay, this is fine, just the way it is.
That's awesome. Um, And then, okay, so that was Vampire. That was, I think, 93. And then comes,
Of 93, I'm pretty sure.
yeah. And then comes B1000. So, you know, so I first got into Get It by Voices in about 96, so a couple years after this. So I don't have a sense of what Vampire was like at the time. You know, I know that Propeller is maybe kind of the first thing that sort of put them on the map. And then they put in Vampire, and then B1000 just kind of exploded. What did Vampire do at the time? Do you recall it? Just not necessarily in terms of sales, but just in terms of your sense of how much of a broader audience did Vampire bring in, if any at all?
It definitely did, actually. But I would also credit the Grand Hour, because singles were still pretty important in early 93, and people actually bought them. We went through that first pressing of 1,000 in like a month, which wasn't a shock necessarily, but you know, there was immediately a lot of excitement, and we dealt directly with a lot of retail stores around the country and even in Europe and Japan. And they were reordering it, which was unusual.
Mm-hmm.
But Vampire got crazy press because for the first time I hired independent publicity, because I knew I just wouldn't be at home that much when it was getting ready to go. I was just traveling and touring and
Touring with Prisonshake.
yeah, at that time, right. So we hired Autotonic, who was Vicky Wheeler and Dan Makta. And they were pretty much, the cool publicity company. They did smaller records, but they were very discriminating. So the magazines and writers that they dealt with, there was a certain level of trust. So that was one of the first releases I did where the promotional aspect was really coordinated, and they got a great response, and the record did quite well. Thing is, though, at the time, I had 3 albums I wanted to put out: Vampire and Titus, My Dad is Dead, Out of Sight, Out of Mind, and Prisonshake's Roaring Third. I didn't have the money to do all of those releases. So I approached Caroline Records about a manufacturing and distribution deal. And they were like, oh, these My Dad is Dead and Prisonshake records are fabulous. Absolutely, let's do it. But yeah, Guided by Voices, we don't see any potential here. And the guy who said that for years afterwards apologized, like, oh God, I was so wrong. Kind of embarrassed. I forget his name, but it was a good enough guy.
Yeah.
So I wound up borrowing, I think, $8,000 from some friends, and I had a few grand on top of that, and we were able to make it happen anyway.
And so, 1993, 1994, I think of that as being almost sort of like the nadir of vinyl in the States, at least as far as mainstream culture is concerned. My sense also is that the underground hung on to vinyl. It never really went away. So, my sense is that you seem to prioritize vinyl quite a bit, even back then, even in 93, 94. Is that true, or was CD and or tape, was that a bigger thing for you back then?
Tapes, not so much. B1000 was the first release that we issued on cassette, and we didn't do another cassette release until 2020. Now that people are interested in them again. But I was already seeing vinyl. And in fact, in 94, I had our first CD only releases, which I regretted by the next year. But at the time, like a good decision.
Yeah.
But it was definitely starting to taper off. I would say 95 to 98, 99 was probably the low point. I was still releasing vinyl, even some vinyl only releases during those years. But yeah, the pressings were getting smaller and smaller. And like reordering Guided by Voices records in 98, 99, I was sometimes only pressing 300 at a time, 200. It was mostly dependent on, oh, so-and-so distributor wants some more vinyl on that. These guys will buy 50. Okay, let's press 300. But then I would say 2001, I really started to see a resurgence, especially among certain artists. Like we did the Electric Eels compilation, Eyeball of Hell. And I think our initial press on that was 2,000, and those were gone in a couple months, pressed another 1,000. And even my distributor at the time was like, you're asking for a lot of money per piece on these, and people aren't buying records. And I'm like, no, trust me, with this band, people will buy vinyl and plenty of it. And I've been haunting record stores my whole life. And I'd actually done some worked at Euclid Records here in St. Louis for a year or two around then. And I'm seeing what people are paying for new releases. It's, this price point is really not a problem. And from that point on, it's only gotten better. It's been an upward trajectory ever since the turn of the century.
Yep.
For me, anyway.
Yeah, no, I get the impression that that's a general trend too. Getting back to the box, so the Guided by Voices box set of early albums. So I think that originally came out in '95. And so, you know, I see I
Correct.
get a little connection is unstable message again. I hope you're still hearing me. Um, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, sounds like a little delay, but um,
Yes.
and so like that seems like a massive undertaking to me. That's 5 LPs, that's 10 lacquers to cut, and a lot of records to press. And you had a hype sticker
Like,
on. You had a hype sticker on there that said something like "Pay no more than $50 for this thing." Which the idea of getting such a
yeah.
box set for that at that price now, or even with inflation, Anyway, um, so like that's a lot of money up front to put out such a box set. Um, what's my question here? How do you do it as a small label?
Well, at the time, I had the deal with Matador that started with B1000 and included several other releases that went on for a little under a year and a half. So the initial outlay was not an issue. They were
Mhm.
taking care of it.
Oh, cool. And what do you remember about your decision to go with Europa Disc and do DMM?
I had used them previously for My Dad is Dead's chopping down the family tree and was very pleased with that. But the main motivation in that case was the artist had submitted an album that was like 25 minutes aside. So
Mm,
it was either spend some more on the mastering or try to get this guy to cut 4 songs from the album. And he was pretty adamant that he wanted all those songs on the album. So we did DMM. It worked out. Um, so that would have been fall of 91 was the first Scat DMM master job. So when it came time to do box, I thought, okay, this is an archival release. The band has legs. I believe people will still be interested in them for years to come. Let's go ahead and make the investment in this truly archival format. And that was a very good decision because I'm
yeah,
still using the parts.
totally. I was wondering if that was sort of behind that decision because that makes it's I assume that it's much easier 25 years down the road to cut from the same stuff when you've got an original DMM master than it is when you cut from lacquer. When you have a lacquer
Yeah, I
master.
don't know if you could even, uh, depending how much the parts had already been used, I don't know if you could even make fresh stampers off of parts that old.
Right. Yeah. And so yeah, I've got a few other things, and I'm really happy with their sound. The original pressing of Deerhoof's Apollo, and then Ohm's first record, great sounding stuff too.
Oh, that's a good.
Hmm. Um, okay, so let me go over my list here. Oh yeah, so when you then put out B1000, you cut that one at True Tone. Uh, do you remember? Do you remember any story behind that? Like, I guess maybe also what I'm getting at, bigger picture is nowadays it's easier to sort of find out about and know about um, mastering engineers and lacquer cutting engineers, just basically through Discogs. And so like back then I wasn't really aware of mastering studios. I wasn't really aware of specific mastering engineers who were good and other ones who maybe weren't as good or whatever. So like now I can just see, oh, you had that cut at True Tone. Okay, here's a bunch of other stuff that I got that was cut at True Tone. But back then, how do you even find out about mastering engineers and mastering studios, and how do you make decisions about where you're going to have stuff cut?
Very much word of mouth and talking to other record labels. You would find out just through, conversations. And I was on the phone all the time because, like I said, we were distributing to a lot of stores and that included other labels. So I probably, back in those years, spent half my entire day on the phone talking to dozens of people, whether they were stores or people at pressing plants or other people who ran small record labels. So there was a whole lot of just, goodwill information sharing, like, hey, we worked with this guy, it turned out great. You know, here's the number or the address. As far as True Tone goes, though, I had nothing to do with that.
Mm.
I was on tour at the time, and that was Matador's decision.
Mm-hmm.
But
Oh,
if
so
you
that
ask
was
me,
sort of like,
that
did Matador license B1000 from you? Is that how that worked? It was sort of a dual release, or?
well, it was both things actually. They signed Scat to a manufacturing and distribution arrangement, but at the same time, they also licensed Vampire and Titus, B1000, and a Prisonshake album called Failed to Menace to be released on Matador Europe. And this is why some copies of B1000 have a Matador label, at least as far as the original pressing, and some do not. The ones with the Matador label were sold just in Europe.
Gotcha. Okay. And so then years later, you did the B1000 director's cut, which was, I believe, 55 songs. And I believe it was every song that was considered at one time or another to possibly be on B1000. Is that what that was, more or less?
Yeah.
And you had
the first four sides are I think the third version of the album, and then on the third LP, all the songs that weren't included on that but had been considered for some version or another were put on there along with the EPs.
Mm-hmm. And John Golden cut that.
Yes, I started working with him in '96.
Oh, really? That long ago?
Yeah,
and he was already independent by then, right? He wasn't at K-Disc anymore at that point, right? He had his own studio, I think.
He had his own setup then.
Mm-hmm.
There is one exception: the Yellow No. 5 album. That's another DMM job.
Mm.
That might be, in terms of sound and just any audiophile measure, that might be the best sounding record on the label.
Really?
Maybe not to everyone's taste, but even the mastering engineer actually called me up and he was just like, I cannot believe the sound of this recording. They did such a great job. It was such a pleasure to cut this record, and can you please send me a copy because I love the album, and yada, yada, yada. But other than that, everything's been cut by John Golden since then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I noticed that Vampire was, although Vampire was maybe April Golden, at least it was John Golden's studio.
What about April?
Could it be that April cut Vampire and Titus?
No.
Yeah, I got an A period Golden on the one side on Vampire and Titus.
I think the A might just be the side.
No, it's on both sides. I'm pretty sure.
Huh.
I'm pretty sure that's her stamp.
I'll have to ask them. She may have cut the lacquer, but certainly John did the actual mastering. And I remember on that one, he actually sent me a reference lacquer before the cut to make sure everything was all right. Because, that's a pretty problematic record to cut.
I guess so, yeah. There's probably all kinds of level changes from song to song, too, that you got to...
And, dropouts.
Yep.
Yeah, I think John has generally done a really, really nice job with the GBV stuff, because I think he understands, like, okay, this is lo-fi, but he's dealt with plenty of that, and he knows they're significant bands. So,
yep.
Like any artist, he's like, okay, people are going to hear this. I want to make sure I do a good job.
Yep.
So he's just been great, and we work with his son JJ sometimes too.
Yeah, I'm a huge John Golden fan. He did almost all of the Sonic Youth reissues on vinyl, and many other things that I can't think of off the top of my head, but huge fan of his. Does a lot of great sounding stuff.
For sure.
So with B1000, I'm trying to figure out a way to ask this question that doesn't sound like somehow insulting the Guided by Voices. But like when you reflect on the idea that like there were up to 55 songs that were originally considered for this album, and then this, what is there, 18 to 20 songs that eventually came out on this album. Like, it seems like almost a miracle in a way, you know, like to that sort of decision-making process, and then to end up on this masterpiece. And you know, there's plenty of good material that didn't make the album too. That my point isn't that the other material sucks, but it's just this that this was come up with. And were you involved in that process at all?
Eventually, yes. The first 5 iterations of the album, some of which went as far as a master being assembled, some were just on paper for a week, and then Bob called up and said, wait, no, shit can that. I'm sending you another tape and a different sequence. And so I was game all along, because although the album changed, it was generally getting better, like each version. And then he must have like panicked. I mean, I don't know this for a fact. I'm just speculating. Thinking like, okay, maybe we need to make an album that's more like Vampire and Titus. And some of this stuff is too poppy. And that 5th version, which has a lot of the stuff that's on side 5 of the director's cut, where it was like first take ever of Shocker and Gloomtown and all kinds of ramshackle, very spontaneous GBV in the basement kind of stuff. I was like, wait, what about buzzards and dreadful crows? And no, this can't be. So I was really scared about it, but I put together a sequence, and maybe Bob at that point, after, you know, struggling to come up with one for so long, maybe it was easier for him to just be like, yeah, this is good. Okay. But much to my shock, he went with the sequence with some minor changes. Yours to Keep was added. And originally, instead of Mincer Ray, there was the track Scissors from King Shit.
Which Scissors is so fucking good. That's one of my favorite Tobin songs.
And he also oh, it's a great song. Scissors is great too, though. And
yeah, I think we got cut off a little bit there, but Scissors is one of my favorite Tobin Sprout songs. But you know, I wouldn't change the. Having said that, I wouldn't change the album.
Right. Yeah, it just worked out. I thought for sure when I sent Bob a tape that he'd just be like, "Yeah, fuck you, Griffin. This is my album, and we're gonna do it like this." But much to my surprise, he went for it. You know,
yeah.
with a few changes, like I said. And that was sort of I've never been a completely hands-off label guy. And maybe it's because I'm a musician myself, and I'm used to talking about music in a very non-personal, this is the work. And if I say something insulting about this part or that song or how this is played, it's not about you as a person, it's about the work, and let's make the work as good as possible. Even if that means the best representation is recording it on a boombox. So I've never been shy about telling artists like, great album, but the sequence is terrible. Let's work on the sequence, or the cover idea is shit. I haven't always been right, but I think I've been correct more often than not, and generally have helped the records. But it's never been a thing of, this is too lo-fi, go re-record it. It might be more that, wait, you sent me on that cassette a month ago a different version of this song that had a better feel. What if we used that? Things like that, just, you know, tinkering around a little bit. And there have been plenty of times where I just left it alone. It's not I need to piss on this and mark my territory. It's about the records and making the best records everybody can.
Mm-hmm. And that's making me think of a handful of songs that Guided by Voices re-recorded for some Matador 7 inches, like My Valuable Hunting Knife and things like that, where they didn't come out better, in my opinion, you know? And, you know, the original boombox 4-track, whatever thing was that was the magic in a bottle, and that's what needed to be on the album.
Well, it's interesting you bring up that song because it originally had a very different feel. They actually recorded it with Andy Chernoff at the I Am a Scientist session. That single was supposed to be a single, not an EP. I Am a Scientist on one side, and the studio version was Chernoff of My Valuable Hunting Knife on the other, which was a much less, Bob wanted that song to have a Devo-ish feel. He wanted it to be kind of mechanical and idiosyncratic as opposed to, you know, big anthemic rock song. I kind of liked the anthemic rock song, but they're both good.
Yeah, you know, one of my favorite things about them has always been how sort of, you know, tiny but brilliant they often sound on record, you know, with the boombox recordings, with the 4-track recordings. You know, you really do get that sort of lightning in a bottle feel of, and then you go see them live, and it's just huge arena rock versions of those songs, and it just blows you away. So like, it almost makes the live show better with that setup of how the albums are recorded. But at the same time, you know, for generations in the future. Yeah, totally. At the same time, for generations in the future, they don't, you know, they don't necessarily get those versions.
Right.
Mm.
Well, we have plenty of bootlegs and live recordings and
videos
and
I used to have that "Crying Your Knife Away" double LP bootleg. You know the one I'm talking about? Yeah, that is that also was sold in my old record collection. I that's sorely missed. That's so good.
Yeah, I think when people heard about Vampire and Titus and like, oh, it's this weird, you know, otherworldly lo-fi record, and then they started playing quite a bit, and people would turn up and be like, well, who's this band? This is great. Yeah. Not that the other stuff wasn't, but nobody was expected to get their asses kicked so hard. And I think that's definitely been sort of a special dynamic that, you know, not only are they a great live band and Bob's a fantastic performer and frontman, but there's this contrast of how many Guided by Voices are there? How many voices are there? You know, there's the live one, and maybe you catch them on a bad night. There's the drunk and ugly one, and the From Mars version, the very professional version. It's just so multifaceted that no matter what aspect of the band brings you in, there's always so much more to explore. And that would be true if they only had 20 albums instead of, you know, 100.
Exactly. Only had 20 albums, yeah. Oh yeah, I also wanted to visit. So in that Please Kill Me interview from about a year ago, you talked about how you originally sort of started working with them. I think someone from their camp sent you maybe a Propeller, and it was originally just about maybe just getting some distribution for some of their old records or something like that. Were you aware of them at all before they contacted you at that point? Because the reason I'm asking too is because I saw that like Spike and Vane played some shows with Death of Samantha, which, you know, Doug Gillard was eventually in Guided by Voices and Cobra Verde and all that. So I'm just curious how much mixing of these different, you know, he was in Dayton. I'm curious how much mixing of these different scenes there were.
Very little. Spike and Vane played in Dayton once. Actually, one of our best shows in early '84 with the original lineup. Some little art gallery or something, but that was great. It was us and Ragged Bags, and I think we played at the Jockey Club in Cincinnati with Toxic Reasons, who are from Dayton. Other than that, I didn't have much exposure to anything in Ohio outside of Cleveland. Clevelanders tend to, for better or worse, think they're the center of the universe. And the rest of Ohio is just cows and
Yeah.
trucks. But we live in this, giant city that's mostly empty. Because, at one time, Cleveland was the fourth or fifth biggest city in the country.
Mm,
Then everybody left.
right.
So, no, very little interaction. And the way that all came about was house at Used Kids Records in Columbus. Uh, they didn't order with us every single week, usually the biggest customer we had. And Ron was like, yeah, there's this older dude. He's like big record collector. He comes into the store a couple times a month. And he's got a band. They just made this new record. It's pretty good. Should I tell him to send you one? I'm like, yeah, why not? Maybe I can sell some for him. And then I got Propeller, and fast forward a week or two, and I'm just losing my fucking mind over this record.
Yeah.
And that's when I got in touch with Bob, and we started selling them. And a couple weeks after that, I'm like, oh fuck it, let's do a single. And then another month or two, thinking, oh fuck that, let's do some albums, And fortunately, everything lined up.
Yep.
So that's that's something that it's a little frustrating to me to hear, like, well, somehow Matt Sweeney and the Beastie Boys, somehow they found Guided by Voices. Well, they found them because I bought the records and I sold them to stores in New York City, hyped the band as much as I could, and the people in the stores told those people.
Yeah.
So, there's nothing mysterious about it. They bought the records at the record store. They got there through Scat.
Yep. Yeah. Okay, I want to just kind of revisit my list here real quick and see what other points. Oh yeah, the Insects of Rock tour of 1994. That's the best tour name I've ever heard in my life.
Yeah.
And so it was Prisonshake and GBV. I think we're losing the connection again, unfortunately, but it was Prisonshake and GBV. And then was Nothing Painted Blue part of that too?
Yeah, and Cobra Verde and A Bullet for Fidel, but those groups only played some of the shows. It was just us and GBV who did every single date.
Mm-hmm. And that was that a national tour, regional tour? How extensive was that?
That was the weirdest national tour ever. I had, suggested to the band that they do this because I thought it would go well, and let's promote the band. But they had limited time, and they had been asked to play the side stage at Lollapalooza, and that started just a few days after the end of the Insects tour. So Tom Windish, who had been booking Prisonshake, he kept asking about Guided by Voices, and it's like, well, we're thinking about doing this thing, but we only have 2.5 weeks, but we want to go to the West Coast. So we decided, like, okay, just put feelers out there. Any club that will give us $1,000 guarantee, we will play. And so that's how the routing happened. We actually went from New York City to Seattle, like no stops in between, 3-day drive.
God.
So that was just insane.
Yeah.
Insanely stupid. But it was a great time, and people in just about every town really turned out for them, occasionally turned out for us.
And Guided by Voices, that the touring band at that time was Bob, Tobe, Mitch, Kevin, and who was playing bass? Was it Greg or was it
Greg?
Greg played bass. Okay.
It was Greg.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. So the classic
and
lineup.
Of course, Pete Jameson was along for the ride as well.
Right. I get the impression there was a big falling out at some
Oh,
point
I
with him.
do. Speaking of that tour, there's in that biography of Bob, the closer you are, there's a thing in there about how we just slept on floors and Greg having dirty clothes and stuff. And for the record, we arranged hotel rooms for every single night of that tour. Now, sometimes it was 4 to 6 of us in a room, but there was no couch surfing on that tour.
Gotcha.
Because I figured these are older guys.
Totally, they're
their
mid-30s at
real
this point, I'm
tour,
thinking.
and like it's rough as it is, they don't need that on top of everything. So everybody was able to shower. There were per diems. Everybody had breakfast.
Gotcha.
But it is true. I made Mitch pay the speeding ticket. I regret that. But at the time I thought like, oh, if I say like, oh, it's fine, we'll cover speeding tickets. Then I thought, well, shit, at the end of the tour, I may have like a dozen speeding tickets to pay. But I should have been more generous about that.
So again, I keep coming back to that interview from a year ago, and please kill me. Hearing what you say about GBV's kind of meteoric success at that point, and you seemed really turned off by kind of the world they were entering, this kind of what that looks like to start moving up the ranks, so to speak. And I sort of got the impression from your interview that was part of what sort of got you out of the record business. Is that fairly true?
No, I wouldn't say that. Because I've never been completely out of the record business. I had a good 8 years or so where things were very, very quiet, mostly due to, personal finances and other circumstances. But yeah, I personally have always been suspicious and distrusting of hangers on. But I'd been playing in bars since I was, 15 years old.
Right.
My rock and roll life happened very, very early. Bob's happened very late. And what I didn't appreciate at the time was how much resistance he had gotten from family and friends, that he was devoting time and resources to this project that they regarded as foolish or not worth his time or whatever. And that after so many years of not being appreciated, to suddenly be surrounded by people, God, no wonder he ate it up. But for me, I was like, oh God, fuck these people. Fuck Michael Azerrad. Who the fuck are these people? And they want to be in the van and come on tour with us. No, it's the bands, not outside people. So that wasn't a conflict so much as me seeing that and like, wow, this is what happens if shit really takes off. And for myself personally, I was like, I don't know if I want that. So with my own band, I really pulled things back. I was just feeling kind of overwhelmed and don't want to make another record like the last one. Don't want to make a lo-fi record because now that Guided by Voice is on the label, people will assume like, oh, we're trying to be like them. Like, so what do I do? And I'm writing different kinds of songs and they're more complicated. And so it took 13 years to do the next record. Because once the idea of playing the game of album tour, once I didn't care about that anymore, then there wasn't much to care about, and except for the music itself. And once it was finally ready, it was ready.
Yeah.
But seeing Guided by Voices become successful made whatever tiny bit of ambition I had disappear. And some of it too is just personally, like growing up, my mom was very doting. She was always telling me I was a freaking genius. And I always just playing music attracted attention from people. And I was used to that and always found it kind of annoying. And also in Cleveland in 1994, all of a sudden, even more people were paying attention to me because, oh, you know,
I don't know if you can hear me, but your sound just cut out. Can you hear me? I hope that's not due to the connection. Let me look at the various buttons on my end, see if anything needs to happen here. I think I hear you again.
okay,
Yep, there you are
where
again.
should I pick up from? Okay.
That you had a doting mother, and you found
Oh, yeah.
attention as you got older kind of annoying. Um,
Yeah, I mean, when you're just out having a drink with friends and people are constantly slipping you demo tapes,
mm,
and the people slipping you demo tapes were talking shit on your label a couple years previously and
yeah,
how you'll never make it. He's a fucking idiot. Now you're kissing my ass because you want your band to have a single or whatever. Get the fuck away from me.
yeah,
So it was wonderful when I moved to St. Louis and I could go to a bar or a show and nobody knew who the fuck I was. And I kept it that way as long as possible. I remember the newspaper here did an article and they wanted to do a photo shoot. And I'm like, no, I don't want anyone to know what I look like. My anonymity will be destroyed. But we just put out this picture disc. It's really pretty. Why don't you just have a picture of that record instead of me? And somehow they went for it.
yeah.
So anyway, those comments about GBV taking off, like it was great to see it, but I knew it wasn't for me. And part of me also just didn't know yet how long it would go on for. And I knew that the band was an issue in Bob's domestic life. And for a second, I was like, God, is this a good or bad thing that I helped this band? Is this all going to work out okay in the end?
Right.
And I was a little afraid that it wouldn't, but I'm glad that it did work out better than anybody could have ever imagined in 1995
Mm-hmm.
or 94.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Right, because you're used to kind of dealing with younger people in bands, and Bob was probably 35 or something like that at that point, and had kids and a job, and or maybe he had already quit his job as a teacher at that point.
Right. He had kids,
Yeah.
a mortgage.
Right. Right. You don't want to set him up for that
I
to
think,
all collapse.
or he was about, I think later, yeah, I think sometime later in the summer of 94, he quit his job.
Yeah. Okay, we're getting close to an hour here. The connection issues, I'm starting to get worried about those. I'm sorry about that. This is the first time I've done an interview at home. I've gone into town to do them in the past. I think I'm going to have to continue to do that in the future. And it's a little bit bothersome with all those internet interruptions, but I think it's mostly worked. Having said that, okay, so let me just kind of end with this. Uh, on your website, you say we maintain the highest standards for our vinyl releases and have done so since the beginning. So, like, what is it about vinyl that makes you just take so much pride in vinyl that makes vinyl so important to you as a label?
I guess that's just personal. It's been the format I've listened to my whole life. And somehow it's just less real if it's on any other format to me. Like the few releases we did that were CD only were just somehow really unsatisfying. Like, you know, the box comes back from the plant. Like, I barely even want to open it. Like, I mean, yeah, I want to see if everything's right. I'm going to pull a disc out, but there's just not the same excitement as the pressing of records, which I still get excited when they arrive and pop them open and play them. Funny aside, when I lived on 71st Street in Cleveland, my downstairs neighbor, who was sort of as Bob would say, a briar, was really confused about all the deliveries we got. And he's like, what do you mean it's all the same record? It's all the same record, same jacket, same record. Well, man, if I was you, I'd have to open up every single one and listen to them. Like, dude, there's 1,000 of them. They're all the same. Oh no, I'd still have to do it. This same guy would sometimes fall asleep with his record player on, and it was auto return. So one day, the first Eddie Money album, he passed out for 6 or 7 hours, and that record was on full blast, and it played like 20 times. Like my bread box on my kitchen was shaking with the bass. So, you know, I guess he could have listened to all of them because he was fine with listening to that Eddie Money record 20 times in a row. Same freaking side too.
That's so funny you mentioned Eddie Money, because sometime in the last year or so, this Eddie Money Greatest Hits on pink vinyl came out at a time when you in particular on Twitter were talking a lot about how insane it is that smaller labels can't get their records pressed. And why is it? It's because the majors are gumming up the works. That's a big reason why is the majors gumming up the works. And then not long after you say that, I see that, oh, look, you can get Eddie Money's Greatest Hits on pink fucking vinyl, but you can't get can't get a GBV reissue.
Right. Yeah, it's nuts. It's nuts. And I mean, how many versions of Rumors are there now?
Oh God,
which blows my mind because, you know, for a good 10 years or so, I was dealing records on the side to make ends meet. I can't tell you how many hundreds and hundreds of copies I've come across of that records back when I bought collections and was just digging around at, you know, stores or estate sales or whatever. Like, I couldn't imagine a world where more copies of that record would ever need to be pressed because there were millions in existence. I mean, that still kind of blows my mind, but I guess a lot of people just getting into vinyl don't understand there are used records in good shape. But I would say along with the major labels, also just the colored vinyl is an issue. Like, I often think if it just didn't exist, if nobody had invented it, or if it had been invented but was such a sonic disaster that nobody ever wanted to buy them, I don't think we'd be having half as, I think we'd be at a 6-month turnaround instead of a 12 right now. Yeah. Because also how many new buyers have been brought in, seduced by these pretty colors. And it's between major labels and the colored vinyl, especially when people are doing, you know, 5, 6, 7 variations, it just gums up the works for everybody. And I'm not innocent. I do colored vinyl. People want it. Not for me, but
I like it. I gotta admit, I like it when it's done well. And RTI is one of the few places that does it well. RTI is one of the few places where it's not noisy. That's the main issue, it seems to me, with colored vinyl, is that it's noisy. Okay.
Yeah.
I got another connection unstable message.
But then again, listen to plenty of low-grade black vinyl that's worse than, you know, a good clear vinyl pressing. You know, in the end, it all depends on the quality of the PVC, and there is such a thing as decent PVC for colored vinyl.
Yep. Okay, let me get one more thing in here before we wrap it up, which is just what's the future of Scat? What do you got coming out? So we got Devil coming out. You're still planning on doing the rest of the GBV early catalog. what else? Do you have anything coming down the pike? Do you have any thoughts of Cobra Verde or Nothing Painted Blue reissues, for example, or anything else?
Sure. Well, Sandbox is in production. We sent the jackets off to be made in October. So those should actually be landing at RTI by the end of this month. That's another issue. Tip-on jackets take about 6 months right now.
Totally.
As opposed to a standard jacket, 5 or 6 weeks.
Although
But
good on you for
think
doing them.
I feel
I love that you're putting this out in this quality.
it deserves it. You know, it seems appropriate that, you know, that we're doing pressings at this late date. It should be as classy as we can make it, because certainly the fans appreciate it, and it's, you know, something for the ages, something that will last. So Sandbox is in production. If we're lucky, that might even be out before the end of the year. We might finally get to the point of GBV reissue every 6 months. I've got represses for the Spike and Bane, Death Drives a Cadillac, Bill Fox's Shelter from the Smoke. The new pressings on those are finally arriving in a week or so. And then it'll probably be a while. There's a record by my junior high school hardcore band, The Dark.
Oh, wow, cool.
That'll probably happen in the fall. And the double album version of the Spike and Bane tape will happen February 2023. We'll have more My Dad is Dead stuff. And Nothing Painted Blue, there has been talk about doing a vinyl version of their singles compilation, Emotional Discipline, which is probably their most popular title. Expanding that with additional material that might even be a triple album. That's a ways off. I don't think the band wants to dig into it right away. I think Franklin has some solo projects he wants to get out first. What else? We'll definitely be doing something interesting for B1000's 30th anniversary. Can't divulge anything yet because I still need to make sure the band is cool with the idea. And other exciting things that the ink isn't dry on yet, but we'll keep cranking them out. Oh, and the next edition of Propeller will have a different jacket.
Oh, interesting. Cool.
It'll be like the recent CD design, the silhouette with the spin art.
Okay. Yep.
I have no idea when those will be ready, but yeah, we're basically out of B1000 and Propeller until the represses hit, and God knows how long that'll be.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Okay. Okay. Well, Robert, I don't mean to embarrass you, but this is such a thrill for me. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this. This is music that just means so much to me, and to talk to someone who's so intimately involved in it, it's just a huge honor. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Okay. Well, we got a delay in the feed again here, but so I guess we'll leave it at that. So thanks again, Robert. Take care. Looking forward to all the stuff that's coming down the pike.
Great. Thanks, man. Have a great day.
You too. So long.